Is grounded in a relational worldview, and that's why relational is there, in the idea that everything that exists in a relation, and everything that can be known can only be known through a relation. So it's grounded both in an ontological worldview, which has a relation is somehow the basic entity that we can deal with, and also in an epistemological perspective based on relations. So what I am proposing, and this presentation is grounded in a proposal, a reconceptualization of complex thinking, building on the shoulders of giants like Edgar Morin, as a mode of coupling, a particular mode of coupling with the world. And I will talk you just a little bit about the theoretical foundations of this. And then if you're more interested, I'll just bring more things. And because someone has put emergence here, I will try to make the connection between both of these themes. So what do I mean when I talk about complex thinking, and what do I mean when I talk about complex thinking from a relational perspective? This, I'm going to go here on my slides, okay? And you probably can see them too. And I'm going to open this slide here that you can manipulate on your own if you want to on the board. But this proposal of complex thinking is presented in this tiny little book that has come out quite recently that's called Performing Complexity. And it presents a view of complex thinking, like I said, grounded in this relational worldview and building on the work of Morin. I'm just going to jump to a lot of things here because you didn't ask about them, so I'm not going to go through these things. But I wanted to call attention that when Morin looked at the emergent field of complexity, he noticed how clearly there were two different approaches being taken. One that was more restricted and not really taking into account the epistemological implications of understanding the world as. So Morin challenged us to embrace complexity at the level of our modes of thinking, and thinking if we want to understand the complexity of our world, we need to develop modes of thinking that need to be congruent also with that complexity. And this is the basic assumption of this work. Right? But complexity as we see it is not something, or the way that this perspective presents it, it's not something that's out there in the world. And it's not something also that's a property of an observer. It's clearly a relational property, something that comes out of the relation between an observer and a world that it enacts in the coupling with it. And so to some extent, when we talk about complexity, we're talking about something that evolves and that evolves in a relationship. But that we could treat as if it was independent on the observer, just for the sake of the conversation, by putting under brackets a bunch of assumptions that I won't go into it unless you ask me to talk about this later. But when I talk about complex thinking, I'm talking about one particular mode of knowing, as one particular mode of coupling with the world that could be defined both as a process and as an outcome. So it is grounded in the idea that you know through the coupling, that our coupling with each other and with other entities, that our engagement in relations generate constraints and generates differences, and differences that make a difference and are perceived as such, and that reveal something about our own internal structures, about our own contributions to the world, about the systems that we interact with, about the nature of our coupling itself. Moving forward, and I'm going to define complex thinking as a mode of coupling with the world that on one hand somehow attends to, describes, explains, anticipates, and adjusts to the complexity of a selected part of the world, or that it's capable of attending to a certain number of properties as currently recognized by a community of observers that would be falling under this umbrella of complexity sciences or complexity thinking. So to some extent, this corresponds to the contents of the thinking and will be very close to what some people have called complexity thinking or complex systems thinking. So it's our ability to somehow identify particular properties in the systems that we interact with. As I said, recognized by a particular community of observers, and I'm putting this under brackets because they don't exist necessarily out there. We have somehow created them also. But this is a mode of thinking that not only is capable of recognizing particular properties of what have been defined as complex systems, but somehow enacts these same properties through the process of thinking, in the mode of coupling with those systems of interest.